We have breaking news. The Supreme Court delivering a major win this evening to Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and Tom Homan by ruling the Trump administration can now go ahead with plans to deport 1.3 million immigrants who have been living here under a program called Temporary Protected Legal Status. I'll explain what that is in a second. The Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, says the law, which was passed by Congress back in 1990, this law, which offered protected legal status to immigrants escaping countries besieged by natural or political disasters, this 1990 law, according to the Supreme Court, made it very clear that all decisions are made through the executive branch as to the status of these immigrants. It is the president, according to the Supreme Court, who gets to decide who can stay and who can go, who's entitled to protected legal status and who isn't. And if they have been granted protected legal status, the court says the president has the power to revoke that protected legal status. And that's what Trump is about to do to approximately 1.3 million people of color. This is the most racist Supreme Court in modern American history, from gutting the Voting Rights Act earlier this year to now making it so Donald Trump can legally round up about 350,000 Haitian immigrants. This is pure, unadulterated racism. The Supreme Court ruled that this law passed back in 1990 by Congress, they're going strict textualist here. They're reading the law exactly as written. They're not seeing it as a living, breathing document that can be violated by a president with racial animus, which this is. This is racial animus. The court ruled today that this law specifically says the decisions by the President of the United States when it comes to removing people with protected legal status, these decisions are not subject to judicial review. Why? Because they don't expect, this Supreme Court doesn't expect Donald Trump to leave office anytime soon. If Joe Biden were president, they wouldn't be granting such sweeping powers to the executive branch. This is a Supreme Court that believes in the unitary executive theory, which is a strong president as long as it's a Republican. Trump is now going to go ahead and try to remove 1.3 million people living here in the United States. More than 300,000 of them are Haitians. There are about 6,500 Syrians. These 1.3 million people come from 17 countries that have either undergone political or ecological or geologic uprisings that make it not safe for them to return. He is planning to deport immigrants from 13 of the 17 countries where immigrants with protected legal status come from. Again, temporary protected legal status was signed into law by the first President Bush in November of 1990. And the purpose was a different country back then. It was to grant temporary legal status to immigrants already here in the United States who can prove it is not safe for them to go back to their country of origin. This is, of course, a huge victory for the racists, a huge victory for Donald Trump, and, of course, ICE. Because, according to the Supreme Court, if you're going to read the law as it was written in 1990, all the power to deport anybody with temporary protected legal status resides with the president, this was back before we had a Department of Homeland Security. This was before we had ICE. So this is a law that needs updating either by Congress or read with fresh eyes by a less racist Supreme Court. You know, Hitler came to power legally. And they passed the Enabling Act and the Nuremberg laws and the racial codes. It was all legal. It was all legal. And most of what Trump does is legal. Megyn Kelly, who said Jesus and Santa Claus are white, and she told black kids to get over it. Megyn Kelly, who was fired from NBC News because she said, I don't understand why people get so upset about blackface. She is a lawyer, and after the Supreme Court ruling came down, in a very studious and measured manner, she shouted on her show, "Go back to effing Haiti." Go back to effing Haiti. This now allows Trump to deny asylum to immigrants at the border. And we should expect 500 children to get thrown out of the country tomorrow. We're going to see, it's going to be very visual and upsetting. The cruelty is about to get amped up. I don't know. Do Republicans think this is a winning message for the 2026 midterms? This is racial animus. And the Muslim ban was overturned during the first Trump administration by the lower courts. They said this Muslim ban is unconstitutional because it has religious animus behind it. Where'd they get that from? From the statements made by Donald Trump in the lead up to the Muslim ban. This is a Haitian ban, essentially, and there is racial animus behind it. So it doesn't matter what the original law said back in 1990. You got to go by the words Donald Trump used before implementing the revocation of temporary protected legal status. When you are on record as the president of the United States saying, why can't we get immigrants from countries that are nice, like Denmark and Sweden, nice countries? Why do we have to get, I won't say blank hole countries? There's unbridled racism here and racial animus behind these decisions. That's what makes these deportations unconstitutional and illegal. You might remember, because they're going to try to get rid of 300,000 Haitians who have temporary protected legal status. You remember in the 2024 presidential election, first it was Vice President J.D. Vance and then Donald Trump during his debate with Kamala Harris spreading the lie that Haitian immigrants with temporary protected legal status in Springfield, Ohio, were eating their neighbors' cats and dogs. It was a lie. The Republican governor of Ohio told Vance to knock it off. Vance wouldn't. Then the death threats started, and Republican business people in Springfield, Ohio, who needed the Haitian immigrants kept telling Vance, knock it off. It's not safe here. Schools had to be shut down because of all the death threats. Didn't stop him. Trump spread the lie. Finally, Vance, near the end of the 2024 presidential race, when it was just incontrovertible that Haitian immigrants were not eating pets, Vance said on CNN, he told Dana Bash, yes, I know it's a lie, but if I have to lie in order to get you to pay attention to the pain my constituents are feeling, I will lie. This is racial animus, and the Supreme Court knows it, but this Supreme Court, they are practitioners of racial animus. This is the mop-up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Just when I think I can't get any angrier and outraged, this happens. So please like this episode, subscribe. I'm being throttled back. I'm doing a meetup at 9 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching me live right now, we're going to do another meetup. I'm going to be interviewing Professor Harvey J. Kaye, the historian, now an advisor to Graham Plattner, the Democratic candidate for Senate in New Hampshire. Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey J. Kaye is coming on my show, and we're going to do a Zoom interview, and you can attend the Zoom meeting. The link is in the description to this episode. It's also in the chat room. We'd love to have you come in and ask questions. It's only for my audio podcast and not the video. This is an audio podcast, which you can download wherever you get your audio. Okay. Well, lot to get to. There is a phony narrative coming out of Washington tonight that goes something like this. On Tuesday, 4 Republican senators found their spine and voted for a concurrent resolution passed in the House of Representatives first that ordered Donald Trump to end the war in Iran. The narrative, and it's a phony narrative, continues to tell you after the Senate passed this concurrent resolution, Trump, and this is true, visited Capitol Hill on Wednesday and got into a screaming match with the 4 Republican senators who joined Democrats in voting yes on this resolution to end the war. And Trump stormed out of the meeting, made threats. He went back home. The Senate took it. This is the phony narrative, that the Senate then took another vote, and this time the Senate failed to pass a resolution demanding Trump end the war with Iran. Now, what is true is that 4 Republican senators on Tuesday voted for the concurrent resolution to end the war, but on Wednesday, 2 of the 4 Republican senators who joined Democrats on Tuesday to vote against the war broke with Democrats on Wednesday. They caved into pressure from Trump, and they voted for the war because they claim they want to give Donald Trump more time to negotiate peace with the Iranians. It's more subtle than that. So that's the easiest way to report it, because there's sizzle, especially when it comes to this guy, Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy. The narrative with Cassidy, Dr. Cassidy's a medical doctor. The narrative is he voted to end the war on Tuesday, got into a screaming match with Trump on Wednesday, declared to the media, I refuse to be bullied, and then chickened out and gave Trump what he wanted by changing his vote. He didn't change his vote. And I'm going to explain to you what really happened. He didn't change his vote. The problem is this is very complicated, and I'm going to tell you why it's very complicated. You're not supposed to understand this, and I'm going to tell you why you're not supposed to understand this. The news media cannot tell you what happened. They lack the vocabulary to explain it. It is procedural. It takes way too much time to explain, and that's what the people in charge bank on. And I'm going to explain it to you in a second, and then I'll explain to you why it's inexplicable. You're not stupid. Anytime somebody tries to make you feel stupid, they want your money. And this is about money. Whenever something is procedural, complicated, it's because a person or an institution doesn't want you to know what your money is being spent on. So they manufacture distractions filled with maze-like technicalities. They use Latin, they use shorthand, they'll call a continuing resolution a CR. Ordinary citizens need a PhD in political science to understand what their lawmakers are doing for them, to them, to them. It doesn't need to be complicated. Your finances don't need to be complicated. People complicate finance to steal your money. So to understand what happened this week in the Senate, to understand what happened this week with the Strait of Hormuz, the peace talks, the White House, this is all you need to imagine to understand why you don't understand what's going on, okay? Please pay attention to this, because I'm going to hurt somebody. Figuratively, metaphorically. No, I'm just going to hurt somebody. I'm going to hurt myself. This Supreme Court ruling is the worst. So this is why you are not allowed to understand the filigree that goes into the Senate and House of Representatives. Okay, I just borrowed $1,000 from you, and you want it back right now, immediately. I don't have $1,000. I spent it. Even worse, I'm afraid you're going to do something bad to me if I don't pay you back. Luckily, I think you're stupid. I don't want to pay you the $1,000 back. I spent it, and I need to spend somebody else's $1,000. So I will say, what are you talking about? I paid you back. Go check. I had it wired directly into your account. In fact, I paid like $5 extra for same-day service, so I certainly hope you got it. Go check your account. So the next day, I get the call. Where's my $1,000? And I have to explain why the money isn't there. So I distract you. I say, well, this is insane. Here, I'm going to send you a screenshot of this phony transaction that I made with my bank to prove to you that I sent you the money. And this is part of a much larger problem. Let's not talk about my not paying you back the $1,000. Let's talk about this phony issue that I sent you $1,000 through my bank, and they didn't come through with it, and they're stealing from me now. Let's talk about that instead of my never paying you the $1,000. So the person says, I need the money, and I'm gonna come knocking if you don't. And you know what? Okay. Let's go to the bank right now and settle this, because I'm just as upset as you are. This is so important. It's a larger problem. It's not just that I owe you $1,000. This is a a systemic problem that we need to address together. So I'm going to come and pick you up, and we're going to go to the bank together. And I'm going to give you the $1,000, and then together we're going to give it to the bank, give them hell. And he goes, good, okay, I'll wait for you. And I say, I'll pick you up at 2. And at 2:30, I call the guy and tell him my car broke down. And I'm really upset because I just had the transmission fixed. It's the same effing transmission that I'm never buying an American car again. And why don't we do this? And then after we don't end up doing that, why don't we do this, that, and this, and you'll never get your $1,000 back, but I'll have you so angry and confused and feeling stupid and taken advantage of. Something else will happen. Your grandmother will get sick, and you'll forget that I basically stole $1,000 from you. That is what's going on right now, okay? What's going on with the war in Iran, what's going on with Trump storming into the Capitol Wednesday and demanding people change their votes. This is all about money. Wars are fought for and waged by money. I don't mean to discount the contributions of our soldiers or our bombs, but wars are for and waged primarily by money. The war in Iran, I'm glad to tell you, is over. They're not going to tell you this, but the war in Iran is over because the Pentagon ran out of money. Not because it was illegal, not because it was a war crime. The war in Iran is over because the Pentagon ran out of money. They're out of weapons. They burned through nearly half our guided missiles and half our interceptors. Meanwhile, we haven't made a dent in Iran's drone and ballistic missile capabilities. We're out of money. We're out of munitions. We're out of political will. We don't have what it takes to seize Karg Island or the Strait of Hormuz. All we can do right now is keep half our Navy in the Gulf of Oman and blockade the Strait of Hormuz. And if and when Iran decides to open it back up to those who are willing to pay the toll, that remains to be seen. They fired on more Iran fired on more ships trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's no military solution to getting Hormuz opened up, okay? So we can't do anything. We're broke. We don't have the munitions. We can keep the Navy for show in the Gulf of Oman until it's time to invade Cuba. Hopefully, if we invade Cuba, Americans will forget how badly Hegseth and Trump effed up in Iran. Maybe they'll invade Cuba. Maybe they'll invade California. Can't do it. Can't win. Can't win this war, despite spending more on defense than pretty much the entire industrialized world combined. We can't fight an actual war because we don't have enough money. We don't have enough money. We don't have the political will, but we don't have enough money. We can keep a war going. We can keep losing a war like we did in Afghanistan, Vietnam, and Iraq as long as the money keeps coming in. But the money, not coming. Trump is not going to get the money he wants. So this war is over. Trump this week had the balls to ask Congress for an $87.6 billion war supplemental, which Congress is never going to pass. Originally, he was going to ask for $200 billion. So now it's $87.6 billion, and it's not going to pass. Right there is the truth. So when you hear people saying, the war is over, where do they get that confidence from? Because Congress won't pay for it. That's how you end a war. You stop paying for it. It's the only way to end a war. War resolutions and the War Powers Act of 1973, that's all for show, smoke and mirrors. If Congress wants to end a war, they stop funding it. So Congress is doing what it's supposed to do. They're not giving Trump and Hegseth the money they need to wage this stupid war. And nobody really wants to admit that. So they do busy work and hide behind these complicated procedural votes that nobody understands. They pass joint and then concurrent resolutions, and their big constitutional issues is a concurrent resolution that's nested in the War Powers Act of 1973. Constitutional? Do we have to pass a joint resolution? No, you just have to do what you're doing right now and not fund the war. In fact, you should take the summer off. If you want to stop the war, go home, boys. You're not going to pass. It's not like you're going to pass that housing bill. It's not like you're going to do anything good for the country. The best thing this Congress could do is go home and not pass a war supplemental. That's the best thing Congress can do. But nobody's going to admit that they're worthless, so they have these. You have Dr. Bill Cassidy declaring on CNN, I screamed at Donald Trump, and that's what needed to be done. No, that's not what needed to be done. Okay, nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to change. What's happening now Nothing's going to change. What you're experiencing is going to be the same thing you're experiencing at the end of the summer. What we're going through, think of yourself as a tanker floating in the Persian Gulf, waiting months to be given permission to go through Hormuz. That's what the summer is going to be like. We're just going to drift. We're going to pretend we think things are going to change, but they won't. That's the best case scenario. That's the best case scenario. Now, what's going on, and the reason you have fatigue is people need to grind out product and get angry about things and pretend issues are more peppery than they actually are. So what do? I'm saying it now, they're focusing all day on Senator Bill Cassidy's false bravado, his hypocrisy, how he pretended to stand up to Trump and then back down by changing his vote. He didn't change his vote. He didn't change his vote. Rand Paul didn't change his vote. Again, we're being told 4 Republicans in the Senate joined the Democrats to vote in favor of a concurrent resolution on Tuesday ordering Trump to bring the troops home. Okay? Those 4 Republican senators are Bill Cassidy, Rand Paul, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Okay? 4 of them voted to end the war on Tuesday, and the narrative goes then Trump stormed into the Senate. There was screaming. Then they held another vote, and 2 of those senators, Rand Paul and Bill Cassidy, caved and changed their vote. They didn't change their vote. It was a different vote. It was a different vote. What is this? Twists, turns, sound, and fury with the sole aim of obfuscating the truth, and the truth being Trump is never going to get the money he needs to fight Iran. He also has no idea how to fight Iran or end this war with Iran because Donald Trump refuses to do the honorable thing, which is resign, admit defeat, and resign. That's what happens. Keir Starmer, for far less, has stepped down in Great Britain. That's what other countries do when you have a monumental, cataclysmic failure like the bombing campaign in Iran. The leadership can't show its face in public for shame, and they step aside. This is a military debacle. Everyone responsible for it should be forced to resign and then arrested because they're all war criminals for doing this. Not here in the United States. Not here in the United States. So how do these people stay put? They create layer upon layer of phony narratives to disguise the fact that I don't have the $1,000 I borrowed from you, and I'm intent on keeping it and trying to steal $1,000 from somebody else. They don't expect you to be able to follow what's really going on because normal people have too much self-respect to sit down with an astrolabe and chart where exactly this effing country is drifting in the sea of ambiguity. Most people have lives, so they don't bother to follow this crap, which is what it is, crap. The War Powers Resolution, is it constitutional? That's crap. You don't stop a war through the War Powers Resolution. There's only one way to stop a war, and that's to say no more money. Now, to Congress's credit, that's exactly what they're doing. But they can't admit that because then it's too simple. And then Americans, if it gets too simple, then Americans start paying attention to money, where their money goes. All you have to do is pay attention to where your money goes in Washington, D.C. Everything else is a distraction. So, yes, I'm in a rage because the alternative is sadness and depression. I have two gears: rage or self-loathing. And I do feel powerless. I mean, the Supreme Court ruling makes me feel impotent. So I'm in a rage, and it's affecting my personal life. I've noticed I'm getting into fights with people, not physical fights, but I'm looking for an argument, which I never used to do. I never used to look for arguments with people. Now I'm itching for a political fight, which is all about me. It's not about making the world better. It's about me proving to my friends that I know more than you do, and you're a piece of bat guano. That's because I'm in a rage and I have to hurt somebody, and I want to make people feel stupid. That's it's wrong. And what I do is I sit like a lunatic, loading my quiver with arrows of useless information about the minutia of what's going on in Congress to help nobody but myself. So I feel I'm not being taken advantage, that I see what's really going on, and then I can turn it on people who disagree with me and not convince them to see things my way, but to convince them they're worthless. This is the problem with political discourse in the United States. It's not about solving problems. It's about getting revved up over nothing and then hurting somebody emotionally. That's what our politics is, because you can't explain what's really going on. Because what's really going on is too complicated for people to understand, and it's too complicated for people to understand because they don't want you to know this is about money. Because if you knew this is about money, you would only ask about the money. And if you only asked about the money, you'd have money, and Jeff Bezos wouldn't. So, nobody changed their vote on the war resolution. There were two separate resolutions. Rand Paul and Bill Cassidy voted in favor of one of those resolutions on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, after Trump screamed at them, they voted against an entirely separate war resolution. Nobody changed their vote, right? But they want you to think, fighting, because that you understand. Bill Cassidy and Donald, a screaming match. People, okay, there was a screaming match? Means nothing. Means absolutely nothing. Okay. Do you want to know what happened? Nothing happened. That's what happened. To justify their existence in Washington, D.C., to make sure you don't know this is about money, they create weather. They want to create weather inside the halls of Congress. You need a cold front in the Senate bumping up against hot air and moisture from Donald Trump, and then the big storm, lightning and thunder, so voters and donors and the media, of course, think, something's happening in D.C. No, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Nothing. The war's over because Congress is doing nothing, which they're great at. This time, the world benefits. Congress is not going to pass the war supplemental. By doing nothing, they're bringing world peace. No money, no war. Okay. Go back and watch my last live stream. I opened the show explaining the difference between concurrent resolutions and joint resolutions. And this is how, why this keeps falling out? The steam coming out of my brain is knocking the earpiece out. I opened the show last time explaining the difference between a concurrent resolution and a joint resolution, and how the Supreme Court ruled in 1983 that concurrent resolutions are not legally binding and joint resolutions are. You should know this stuff. You should know this stuff. I didn't. We should know this. We know the rules of football. We should know the rules of Congress. Very quickly, a concurrent resolution doesn't require a president's signature. If both the House and the Senate pass what is called a concurrent resolution, then it goes into effect and the president has no say. That's what a concurrent resolution is. But in 1983, our Supreme Court said, no, that's not how things work. In order for a resolution to be legally binding, it must be what is called a joint resolution, not a concurrent, a joint resolution, meaning Congress passes it first, then the president can either sign it or veto it, and if he vetoes it, Congress can override that veto only if it can muster 2/3 majorities in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. I didn't understand a single word I just said either. The War Powers Act of 1973, this is what we keep hearing about. It grants Congress authority to end a war by passing a concurrent, not a joint, a concurrent resolution. But the Supreme Court has already said in 1983, concurrent resolutions are not legally binding. So the War Powers Act of 1973 is essentially useless. They keep it around for show and symbolism, but it's, if it ever goes before the Supreme Court, it's going to get gutted. And up until next week, we've never had a concurrent resolution to end a war passed in both the House and the Senate, but that's what happened on Tuesday. And theoretically, there won't be, but there should be a constitutional showdown between Donald Trump and Congress over passage of this concurrent resolution to end the war. This now should go before the Supreme Court, and they should be given an opportunity to rule that it's unconstitutional, and that's the end of the War Powers Act of 1973. That's the problem with using a weapon that is no good. It's one thing, and that's the problem with Iran. See, we always had the War Powers Resolution, but we never admitted to ourselves, well, there's no ammo inside of it. But it's threatening. You can go on television, we're going to invoke the war power, and it sounds scary. But then when you invoke it, you realize, oh man, it's a dud. It's great to threaten Iran. You can get a lot done like Obama did, by threatening Iran. But once you start bombing and they get to see, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough bombs, you don't have enough political will, that's why you never go to war and you never use weapons like the War Powers Act without making sure they're actually loaded. So it's all nonsense. Now, Trump is never going to get the $87 billion he wants from Congress to fight his war in Iran. But Congress, nobody wants to admit that. Nobody wants to admit that we lost the war to Iran. We can't admit defeat. So busy work, smoke, some flames, screaming matches, threats, and you make it look like the war is still being debated. It's not. We lost. It's over. And nobody changed their vote. Rand Paul and Bill Cassidy voted in favor of that concurrent resolution on Tuesday to end the war, but they voted no on a separate bill Wednesday. Completely different bill. They didn't change their vote. That bill they voted no on Wednesday was a joint resolution. to end the war, not a concurrent resolution. It was a joint resolution introduced by Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. A joint resolution, according to the Supreme Court, is constitutional. All bills that come out of the House and Senate are joint resolutions. They're joint because it's done jointly with the executive branch. So a joint resolution requires the president's signature, and short of that, if he vetoes it, then you need 2/3 majorities in both the Senate and the House of Representatives to override the president's veto. Cassidy and Paul voted against the joint resolution on Wednesday because they said they were briefed by the White House about how talks are going with Iran, which is just utter, it's what's inside the reflecting pool now. That's what it is. They said they were given answers that were satisfactory enough to justify not voting in favor of the joint resolution to end the war because they wanted to give Marco Rubio and Jared Kushner and J.D. Vance enough time to strike a deal with Iran that is never, ever going to be struck unless we surrender. Which we're not going to do. So we're just going to drift the entire summer. We're just going to drift. And Trump is banking on something new and shiny. So we forget the war in Iran. We forget that we lost. Can't say that. Too humiliating. So we vamp. We waste time and money and, of course, lives. We're good at this. We're good at prolonging the inevitable, which is a loss. What we do is we keep fighting until people say, are we still in Afghanistan? Are we still in Vietnam? We stayed in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And right now we're refusing to state the obvious about Iran. Why? Because those who created this massive war crime want to avoid prosecution. They want to save face. That's how it works in the United States. Why do we have forever wars? Because we never admit defeat. Douglas MacArthur famously said, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. Well, same goes for wars in America. They never end. They just become less interesting, and we forget that the war is even happening. And in order to do that, you have to forget the soldiers who fought in it. Very important to block out the veterans and what they're going through. Again, the lesson from all this is think about money. Think about money. You pay your taxes or try to pay your taxes. This is your effing money. I borrowed $1,000. Maybe I can pay you back, but I want to keep the $1,000. I think I can spend it better than you can. The first thing you have to say when you wake up and start reading the news is, where's my effing money? I don't want to hear about the wire transfer not going through and your car's in the shop and you're going to meet me. Where's my effing money? Forget war resolutions. Forget whether the Supreme Court is going to rule that a concurrent resolution is non-binding, therefore Congress is powerless to stop a war. That's what they want you to believe, that Congress is powerless to stop a war. And my response is, where's my effing money? I want my money. Because if you give me back my money, you won't be able to fund these wars. No war supplemental. They're not going to get it. And now, what you need to do, no $1.5 trillion budget for the Pentagon starting in fiscal year 2027. So we're going to defeat them. You got to call your member of Congress and say, no war supplemental. No war supplemental. Don't be distracted. Don't call your congressperson and say, you need to introduce a war resolution to... No money. If you're calling your congressperson and saying, you need to reintroduce the war resolution to end the flag, you're an effing moron. You call your member of Congress and say, if you vote for that war supplemental, I'm not donating to you anymore. And you certainly have to call your member of Congress and say no to a $1.5 trillion budget for the Pentagon for fiscal year 2027. That's it. Everything else is a distraction. Everything else is a distraction. We spend close to $1 trillion a year on the Pentagon. But we can't fight wars with just $1 trillion. We need the war supplementals. That's why Trump wants a $1.5 trillion budget. He wants to increase the Pentagon's budget by 40% so he no longer has to go hat in hand every year begging Congress for more money when he attacks a country. He'll have an extra $500 billion to spend to fight a war on who? Cuba, California. No more money. No 40 to 50% increase in military spending. That's all you're doing is you're bankrolling future illegal and unnecessary wars, and he's going to use that military on us. That's another way to save our democracy. You spend $1.5 trillion a year. In September of every year, the Pentagon has to zero out its budget because Congress will say, oh, we see you have extra money laying around. They have to use, it's called use it or lose it. So they're going to have to spend $1.5 trillion to justify $1.6 trillion for fiscal year 2028. We don't have enough imaginary enemies overseas. Trump is going to go after the imaginary enemies in this country. The Supreme Court just gave him permission. He's going to deport 1.3 million immigrants, thanks to this Supreme Court ruling. And you know that they believe that out of 340 million Americans, 100 million either don't belong in the United States or belong in a for-profit detention facility. That is what they believe. Now, you might say, you're crazy to say. They don't, they believe that. Greg Bovino, the former Border Patrol commander, said that. The Department of Homeland Security put out tweets under Kristi Noem showing a picture of a beautiful beach. And it says, imagine how our country's going to look once we get rid of 100 million. That's the number. Little under 1/3 of the country doesn't belong here, according to these people. I wish I was doing this. I wish I was telling you this because I'm desperate for attention, which I am. But this is true. This is true. As long as you're not thinking about where your money's going, they'll continue to do this. So you want to stop forever wars? You want to stop the slaughter in Gaza? No more money. No more resolution. We're going to do a resolution about whether or not Israel has a right to exist, and we're going to debate that. No, you're going to vote to stop funding it. That's all that matters. Want to end the for-profit ICE detention centers and put an end to ICE serving as our president's palace guard? The Supreme Court just gave him permission to throw 1.3 million people of color out of this country, all you need to do is vote for the Democrats in November. You don't need to abolish ICE. We should abolish ICE. We should pass a law that outlaws for-profit detention facilities. Joe Biden signed an executive order. Obama did. And then Trump overturned that executive order. For-profit detention centers should be against the law. And the CEO of Geo Group and Core Civic, they should be in prison for manslaughter. But short of that, you cut their funding. The Supreme Court just ruled the president has the power to deport $1.3 million. Well, you get a Democratic Speaker of the House, and he can paraphrase Andrew Jackson and tell the Supreme Court, well, you just made your ruling, let the president enforce it. Can't enforce bad laws if you have no money. If the American people only focused on their money, if the American people only focused on money when it comes to politics, there would be no billionaires, there would be no income inequality. That's why Congress is as hard to understand as the bill you try to read from a hospital. Ever get a bill from a hospital? People who are hiding and or stealing money don't want you to figure out what they're doing. So, October 1st, the new budget for fiscal year 2027 is supposed to go into effect. It won't be ready, it never is, because it's always a battle royale fought by competing interests over one thing: money. That's it. They're fighting over your money, actually. They're fighting over, these are billionaires fighting over who gets to loot the treasury more than the other person does. So Washington, D.C., as I keep telling you, is a lot simpler than they want you to realize. It's money. And the people who have or disperse money have power. And power is even more intoxicating than money. Power is almost as intoxicating as revenge. Revenge is still tastier than money. But you need money in order to get power and exact revenge. Government, whether you like it or not, and I don't like it, but as I keep telling you, if you're on a football field, you can't play baseball. And so the rules of the game in Washington, D.C., until something better comes along, until we have a constitutional convention, the rules of the game in Washington are power, revenge, and in order to get those two, you need money. That's all it is. People in Washington, people in politics, people in government, not the 2.2 million people who work in the administrative state. They actually try to help when they're not being held back by Trump and Elon Musk. But the people who get elected, the people who are appointed to political positions inside the administrative state, they wake up every morning trying to figure out how to get as much money as possible to accrue as much power and then exact as much revenge as they possibly can. And if you're not playing that game, you end up saying things like this: you know, we have to celebrate the small victories. When people say that, and I say it, we're weak, and we got to stop saying that. You know, I always say, well, we had a good day today. Mom Donnie did well. 3 of us can't. We have to celebrate the small victories. No, we have to take money from the richest 1%. Because you take money, you start taxing billionaires out of existence and redistribute the money downward instead of upward, which is where it's been going since Reagan took office. You distribute the money through taxation downward. By doing that, what do you get? Well, you get money, and then you get power, and then you get revenge. And revenge, I believe in law and order. I believe in law and order. It is the civic responsibility of all Americans, or at least everyone in the bottom 99%. It is your civic responsibility to wake up every morning and ask, who has money and how do I take it away from them? Including your boss, don't steal from your boss. How do I get paid more? How do I take money away from the rich? How do I get my boss to pay me what I'm worth? How do I get my rent lowered? How do I withhold my rent legally until my landlord fixes the sink? How do I take my credit card company to small claims court? How do I get my student debt forgiven? How do I get the minimum wage turned into a livable one? How do I get free college for my children, free child care and health care? How do I make the Department of Justice pressure the oil companies and the for-profit health insurance companies? How do we get a Department of Justice to lock up the CEOs of the for-profit health insurance industry and the oil companies? Why aren't we charging them with manslaughter? You do that, you start arresting CEOs. We used to do that. We used to arrest CEOs. Not that far long ago, under the George W. Bush administration. What you're doing when you use your Justice Department the way Donald Trump is, but you use it for the right reasons, when you use it to exact revenge and justice, then it's the virtuous cycle. You get money, you get power, you get revenge or justice. Some people call it justice, I call it revenge. Fight for money. Play the same game your opponent plays. And if you play the same game, if we, the 99%, play the same game our opponent plays, we have an advantage because there's more of us than there are of them, a lot more. Do the math. I should wrap it up. But if I do, I'll just keep talking. One of the reasons Trump became president in 2016 is Obama, as president, the 8 years before Trump, Obama refused to tackle the corporate crime wave. Forget all the bankers. I'm not talking about the bankers who crashed the economy in 2008, then got a bailout from the federal government, which they used to pay themselves massive bonuses. Forget that they never got prosecuted by the Obama Justice Department. I'm not talking about that. Under Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder, not a single Fortune 500 CEO went to prison. Google it. Not one. Even George W. Bush prosecuted Fortune 500 CEOs. The head of Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, a couple of others, all ended up serving at least 10-year prison sentences because they were prosecuted by either Alberto Gonzales or was it John Ashcroft? Those were his two attorney generals. the George W. Bush administration locked up CEOs. Obama becomes president, didn't prosecute a single banker, not one Fortune 500 CEO prosecuted under Obama or Biden. Not one Fortune 500 CEO was prosecuted when Joe Biden was president because they're more honest. They don't break the law when Biden and Obama are in charge. Wells Fargo creating phony. We found out during the Biden administration about Wells Fargo foreclosing on homes they didn't have mortgages for. Wells Fargo opening up phantom savings accounts and charging people for it. Boeing, the pharmaceutical companies, all of these CEOs, these criminal CEOs from Wells Fargo, Boeing, the pharmaceutical companies that got busted, they all broke the law during the Biden administration. And Merrick Garland, our attorney general, went after them. But instead of prosecuting these CEOs in criminal court, the Department of Justice under Merrick Garland relied on what are called deferred prosecution agreements. That's where instead of going to prison, the CEOs order their companies to pay massive fines. So they don't go to prison. They don't have to pay, the CEOs don't pay the fines. Their company does. And that is what a deferred prosecution agreement is. Florida Senator Rick Scott ran a hospital chain, and at the time he was taking, the Justice Department filed a civil lawsuit. He got fined, his company got fined, I think like $1.5 billion for ripping off Medicaid and Medicare, and didn't come out of his pocket. He was doing it. Deferred prosecution agreement. No prison sentence, doesn't come out of his pocket, comes out of the company's pocket. So that's one of the reasons Donald Trump returned to the Oval Office. By the way, the Justice Department loves deferred prosecution agreements because it costs money to lock up a CEO. But you make money by fining their companies. So, what have I been telling you? What have I been saying throughout this entire episode? Where's my effing money? Justice Department wants money. They don't want to lock up white CEOs. They want their companies to hand over some money. This is one of the reasons Donald Trump returned to the Oval Office. This is one of the reasons Trump in 2024 won the popular vote and the Electoral College. I want you to think about this for 1 second. January 6th, the insurrection, was January 6, 2021. Donald Trump didn't get indicted by the Biden Justice Department until 2.5 years later. Got indicted in August of 2023, right when Trump began running for president. So you wait that long, you give Trump license to call this a political prosecution. You don't put Donald Trump on trial while he's running for president. You put him on trial in 2021, right after January 6th. How much evidence did you need to gather, Merrick Garland or Jack Smith? The impeachment trial in the Senate for Donald Trump because of the insurrection on January 6th. The House of Representatives impeached Donald Trump on, January 13th? Like a week later, the House, January 13th. The House impeaches him. The trial, the lawyers the House managers, the impeachment managers who prosecuted Trump in the Senate, they were able to mount a prosecution by February 13th, 2021. So that's a little over a month after January 6th, they were able to mount a prosecution trial in the Senate over January 6th. But Merrick Garland took 2.5 years, waited till Trump was officially a candidate for president, giving him license to say, this is a political prosecution. I should mention it takes 2/3 of the Senate to convict a president during an impeachment trial. So we know that Trump was acquitted, but only because it takes 2/3 of the Senate. 57 senators, more than a majority, voted to convict him. It just wasn't 2/3. Okay? So you kind of got a conviction in the Senate. Merrick Garland and Joe Biden, you prosecute when the crime is still fresh in the jury's memory. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you very much for joining us, or me, and the voices in my head. We're doing a recording session of my audio podcast tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. The registration link is in if you're watching me live, the registration link is in the description. I put it in the chat room at the beginning before we went live, and I'm interviewing Professor Harvey J. Kaye for my audio podcast. We start at 9 p.m. Eastern, and come join us. You don't need Zoom. You'll get instructions on how to call in without Zoom. And I'm going to wrap it up. I think I'm going to wrap it up. I think, yeah. I think I did enough damage. Okay. I got a lot more, but I'm going to stop. First rule, always leave the audience wanting less. That's my rule, right? Yeah. Stop when you're behind. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I'm being throttled. I'm too sexy for Facebook. Facebook says my content is too sexual in nature. So help me out by sharing these episodes and liking these episodes so I remain in your feed. If I made any mistakes, if I said, sometimes I'll say 2001 instead of 2021. Believe me, I listen to the show, I hear that. On the last show, I accidentally called it the War Powers Act of 1983 or something like that. This is a one-man band, so there's a lot of research that goes into this. I'm juggling a lot of facts and numbers in my head, and sometimes I think I'm saying 2021, but it comes out 2001. And I assume most of my listeners understand that's an honest mistake. But if I got real facts wrong, leave a message, and I issue corrections on this show. And yes, I'm really angry. I'm angry. I wish I could tell you, take a deep breath, spend time in nature, be around the people you love, and it's all going to get, not right now. Not after the Supreme Court issues a ruling like this. The racial animus in that ruling. This is, is it the Dred Scott decision? No. But I'd like to think we've evolved past that. But this is a major setback. This is a major, major setback. All right, goodbye. Come hit the registration. Come see me on Zoom tonight. If you're watching live, come talk to me. I need to be around people. Come to the Zoom meetup at 9 p.m. You don't need Zoom. You can phone in, and your camera will be off. You're just going to look at me. Maybe Professor Harvey, J.K., and Bert Ross is going to join us. So I'm starting to have guests on the audio podcast. Shut up, David. Shut up.